In today's photo deconstruction, I'm going to show you how I use one light and a reflector to create a really rich, red, stylized portrait. All right, so let's begin with the concept. Now, if you know my work, you know that I love red, and in particular, I love monochromatic red, meaning I'm shooting red on red on red, a red dress, a red background, a red headpiece. And because I love red so much, my wardrobe stylist is always keeping his eye out for red styling pieces. You know, he's looking for dresses and headpieces and gloves and things that he can put in front of my camera. And so he actually sent me a photograph of this floral red sequin headpiece, and I fell in love, and I told him, yes, we have to shoot this. So the concept began with that, and because I love my monochromatic red, I decided to go with a red background. Now the background that I'm using here is a Savage Universal primary red background. Now the reason I like this so much is if I don't light it and I let it fall to shadow, it becomes really dark. It's very luscious. But if I throw a light on it and brighten it up, it can become really bright red and poppy. So it gives me quite a lot of versatility. Now, at first, when I was testing out this shot, I tried a little bit of a harder light source, not super hard. I actually started with a beauty dish, but I felt like the light wasn't evenly lighting the subject. It wasn't quite as flattering on her skin. So what I ended up with was one soft light source. So as you can see on the right-hand side of the frame here, I used an extra large umbrella with diffusion. Now, fundamentally what this is, it's like a big, large softbox. You could also use an octabox, you could use a softbox, it doesn't really matter. But the reason that I like umbrellas so much is because they're easy to set up. And then you add the diffusion and it's giving me a similar quality of light of the softbox. Now, you'll see that it's actually relatively close to my subject and kind of at a high angle. Now, the reason I did this is the closer that I brought it to her, the smoother the skin looked, the more beautiful and even and silky the highlights looked across her skin tone. Now the high angle is because I wanted to carve out her cheekbones, give a little definition to the neckline, all of that. If the light was too low, it wasn't going to be giving me that definition. All right, so after that, I'm looking at the shot and one side of her face was very bright, but then it really fell to a dark shadow on the left-hand side of the frame, which is why I added the white V-flat. Now in this case, I decided to go with the large reflector. It's 4 by 8 foot, it's really big. But I could have gone with a small white reflector, just something that was large enough to reflect both onto the side of her arm and her head. I don't want it too small of a reflector because then it would only kind of light the side of her face. Now the reflector I have at an angle so that it is filling in shadows a bit, but also kind of kissing the side of her body. So the area that was falling to dark shadow has been lifted up just a little bit. By the way, if you don't have a space for a large V-flat, there are also smaller V-flats, something like the V-flat World V-flats are actually portable and they collapse down, but they're also just a little bit shorter. So if you only have 8-foot ceilings, obviously this size of V-flat won't work for you. So there are definitely other solutions. So next up, let's talk about our camera and our camera settings. For this shot, I use the Canon EOS R5 and a lens that I use all the time, which is the RF 24-105. So the 24-105, a lot of photographers are always confused why I'm not shooting with fast primes, but I'm not shooting wide open, so it doesn't really matter. It's still a super nice sharp lens, but it gives me some flexibility. Now the shot that I ended up going with was around 58 millimeters. So yes, I could have perhaps used a 50 millimeter lens and moved in a little bit or cropped in a little bit closer. But I like the ability to zoom and move and see in camera how my compression changes what the shot looks like. Now for camera settings, I was shooting at 1/200th of a second. I always shoot at or around my sync speed, which this is what 1/200th of a second is doing for me. I shot at f8 and ISO 200. All right, so this is giving you an idea of my setup here. A couple other things I want to draw attention to. You'll notice the angle of the umbrella is actually pointed kind of across. It's actually kind of pointed into the V-flat. Now there's a reason I wanted to do this. If I pointed it back towards camera, like way back towards camera, what would happen is I could make the background look really dark. So if I'd wanted a deeper background, I could feather the light away from the background. Now, if I wanted a lighter background, I could point it at the background. In this case, what I was trying to balance is I wanted enough light to bounce into the V-flat to fill in the shadows on the shadow side of her face, but also enough light from that single light source to spill on the background so it wasn't too dark. So one light, you have to be really careful with it. You have to pay attention to exactly what that light is doing, whether it's bouncing or spilling where you want it to in the shot. All right, so far what I've done is I've broken down the lighting and the thought process behind the shot, but I want to show you just a couple more things I did, and then we'll get on to the retouching part of this. Now, the shot that I ended up selecting is the one that you see here. Now, as I was shooting, I loved the gloves that she had on, but it felt weird for her just to pose her hands around her face. So what we did is we actually brought in a posing table. And no, this is not a special posing table. What we did is we actually cut some of the primary red background, put it on the posing table, and taped it underneath. And what that did is it gave us a red surface so that it would unify the whole shot. Now, the posing table is black, and I felt that when I had a black posing table, all I was looking at was just like the heaviness at the bottom of the frame. So this is something I do all the time. And one of the reasons I like my paper backgrounds is if you need to change the color of a surface, I just chop it off and then I tape it on. So let me show you the different steps of how this image came to life. This is what the shot looked like straight out of camera. So there is no contrast, no clarity, like I haven't changed anything. Here's what I see in the image as I analyze it. First and foremost, I try to see where my eye is going in the frame. And so what I'll do is I'll look away from an image and then I'll look back and say, okay, where was my eye drawn to? All right, so the very first place I thought it was drawn to was on the flower itself in the top left-hand corner of the frame there because of the bright highlights. So my eye was drawn there. I knew I probably wanted to darken it down a little bit. And then right after that, I looked to the bottom of the frame and I was looking at the paper. The thing is, the paper, because of the angle it was to the light, it was reflecting a ton of light. And so I found that quite distracting. I want it to look more like the color of the background, but I couldn't feather the light off of it. So I just knew this is going to be something I would have to do in post. I would have to darken it down with curves or some other tool. Looking at the frame, so just a couple of other things. There's a spot on her gloves that it was just a stain on the gloves and you would have to Photoshop that out. There's kind of a little spot in the hair I might want to fix. And then just some small imperfections in the skin. You know, there's a scar here and here, a little bit underneath the eyes. So as I was analyzing what I wanted to retouch, overall, it was mostly lighten and darkening, and then just a little bit of skin retouching, really not too much. So straight out of camera. Now, let's take a look when I do a little bit of color grade before I retouch the skin. Okay, so color grade. So here's the before and here's the after. Here's the thing. I do not think that the after is necessarily better or worse. It's a stylistic choice. So as I was looking at the original shot, I felt like the red being so saturated made it a very happy, poppy shot. And she doesn't have that expression, and that's not what the pose and the styling is giving me. So what I did is I actually desaturated some of the reds and I darkened things down. And I thought that it gave it a little bit more of a sultry and powerful look. So it's not right or wrong, it's just a choice, a visual choice. And this was done during raw processing. This is before I ever entered Photoshop. Okay, so we started off straight out of camera, our color grade, and now let's go on to the retouch. Let me show you before and after a bit. So notice how I darkened down the red flower, fixed that hair just a little bit, and I darkened down and evened out the posing table that she was on. You'll also notice a little bit, see how her skin kind of shines a little bit more? It's a little bit on the arm, a little on her cheeks, and kind of her collarbones and everything. So what I did is I did some burning and dodging. So basically lightening and darkening. And so the areas that were already light, I went over and I lightened them more. And then on her arm, just to give it a little shape, I painted lightness down the middle and then shadows on the outside. And what it does is it rounds things out. So you can see how the arm just has a little bit better shape and it's a little bit smoother. So I think that the resulting image that I'm getting here is just, it's very sultry and it's sleek. It looks rich, it looks luscious. Whereas I think the original tones, it didn't quite fit the mood that I was going for. All right, now, I wanna show you just a little bit. This is the image that I ended up selecting, but I wanna show you some of the considerations, like the culling process as I was looking through my choices. Now, the reason that I went with this shot was very much a compositional one. So I felt like I would look at her face, then I would look at the headpiece, and then my eyes would travel down one arm, around the other, and back up to the face. So I felt like it really gave me a circular composition that made the shot much more interesting. I had other shots that worked well, but I felt like this just had a really nice balance. Sometimes what happened to me was the flower in the top of the frame, it's so much, it's bright, it's sparkly, it's large, that's all I was looking at. So by giving some interest at the bottom of the frame with her arms and her hands, it balanced out the image visually. All right, so let me show you some of the images that were making the cut for consideration, and then what I eventually got rid of. By the way, you'll see some color shifts in here. As I was shooting, I'm shooting tethered. So as the images are coming into the camera, what I'm doing is I'm adjusting the color and the contrast and the clarity and all of those sorts of things. But it's a raw file, so it doesn't matter. I could go back and change it later on. But that's what you'll see, some things shift. It's not because my camera was messing up or the lights were messing up. I was changing my mind and I was trying different things to kind of envision what the shot was going to look like in post-processing. Okay, so here's where we started. What I see when I'm looking at this shot is that the bottom part of her body looks just really square and blocky. There's no movement throughout the pose. Also, I'm not including the hands. And then all my attention is going to the hat. So as I am shooting, what I'm trying to do is create a little more shape at the bottom of the frame. And you see that here, when I pop her arms out to the side, at least I see a little bit of her body, a little bit of the negative space, but I actually thought the bottom of the frame was looking a little wide and getting too much attention. And so I tried a bunch of different poses here. And so again, I thought maybe she looked a little bit too wide, so I turned her to the side. And this works for me, right? I think that this draws a little more attention to her face, except for that bright highlight on her shoulder. I was really looking at her shoulder there. And so I was like, okay, maybe I can balance out the shoulder by putting a light on the background so it draw a little more attention up. I did that for a while, but it didn't work for me. So you can see here, this, I thought the side of the flower wasn't as interesting. Her turned more back to camera is what I preferred. I actually think this shot works. I don't think it's profound, but I look at her face, at the flower, then down her arm. I think it's got a little bit of movement to it. But I wasn't really getting the gloves in the shot. And so eventually you'll see that I brought in the posing table. And so my thoughts with the posing table were that I wanted to create triangles, maybe a shape between the side of her body. I wanted to make sure I had leading lines up to her face. Originally, I was thinking, having the hands crossed, but then there was nothing to lead your eye back up to the subject. So you can see kind of how I work through this. And I said too many hands, but I was getting close to what I liked around here. And so it was just about trying different hand positions until I found, see, this is what I thought didn't work with her hands down low, wasn't drawing my eye back to the face. So somewhere in here, I started to find what I was looking for. And see just that little teeny extension of the fingers, it connects the gloves and her hands and her pose to the headpiece. And I think just that teeny bit of adjustment to the pose made all the difference. So that's kind of how I was working through the shot, in case you want to see a little bit of my thought process. So no, I don't get the shot right away. I do have to experiment and try to figure out what's working for me and what is not. And so this is, right around here is the pose that I ended up going with. All right, guys, I hope that you enjoyed this photo deconstruction. I find this type of breakdown of an image to be one of the most powerful ways to understand the thought process as an artist creates. So thank you so much for joining me. Now, be sure to check out the links in the description below if you want to see the gear used in the making of this video or the tools that I utilize. And of course, you want to subscribe because I have a lot more content just like this coming your way. See you next time.